You done insulted me, and I got to kick your ass right now. And afterwards, I don't want no hard feelings either.
Oh, really? Oh, really?
Three of the greatest comedians who ever lived. One set, one movie. And almost none of them wanted to be there. Harlem Nights, 1989. The film Eddie Murphy poured his entire soul into. His money, his name, his legacy. He had the biggest stars in black comedy history standing right next to him. $30 million, silk suits, a jazz-soaked world built from scratch. It should have been the greatest comedy film ever made. So why did the man he worshipped secretly hate him? Why did his co-star hide a devastating illness from the entire cast? Why did the actress who almost played the lead end up working retail to pay her bills? And why did Murphy, after one of the most powerful runs in Hollywood history, swear off directing forever after this single film? We are going deeper into Harlem Nights than anyone has gone before. 28 facts. Not Wikipedia summaries, but the real dirt, the real pain, the real behind-the-scenes chaos that almost broke this movie before it ever hit a screen. Quick question before we start. How many times have you actually watched Harlem Nights? Drop your number in the comments right now, because what you are about to learn is going to send a lot of you back to rewatch it tonight. Let's go. Fact 1. Richard Pryor was already sick before cameras rolled. Watch the film again. Look closely at Richard Pryor. Not his face, not his lines, but his body. There is a stillness to him that feels deliberate, almost meditative. For years, fans assumed it was an artistic choice. Sugar Ray was the elder, the mentor, the calm to Murphy's chaos. It seemed intentional. It was not. In 1986, 3 full years before filming began, Richard Pryor was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis.
Loneliness is often brought into very sharp focus, and according to figures released just today, it can disproportionately affect people living with multiple sclerosis.
A disease that attacks the central nervous system. A disease that robs the body of the explosive physical energy that made Pryor one of the most expressive comedians who ever lived. And here's the part that will stay with you. He told nobody. Not the studio. Not the producers. Not Eddie Murphy. Nobody on that set knew what was happening inside his body. The man who once set himself on fire and turned it into comedy was quietly losing a battle no one could see. Every scene, he was fighting, and he never let it show. Fact 2. Eddie Murphy had no idea his idol was sick. Murphy has spoken about this, and the hurt in his words is real. He said he was like a puppy around Pryor, excited, buzzing with the reverence you can only feel for someone who shaped your entire identity. He had more pictures of Pryor on his walls than Elvis Presley. He built his comedy DNA by studying Pryor the way a theology student studies scripture. And here was his chance. His idol on his set, in his movie. He expected mentorship. He expected the greatest creative collaboration of his life. He got silence. Murphy admitted years later that he never put together what was actually happening. He watched Pryor move slower than expected. He felt the distance. He interpreted it as rejection, but the truth was something far more heartbreaking. Pryor was in pain, carrying it alone so that no one would pity him, so that he could still be Richard Pryor for a little while longer. How many of us have watched that film without ever knowing that? Fact 3. Richard Pryor thought Eddie Murphy didn't like him either.
Richard Pryor film and an Eddie Murphy film. So we're watching Harlem Nights.
Here is where this story twists in a way that almost no one talks about. In 1997, Pryor published his autobiography, Pryor Convictions. He was honest about Harlem Nights in a way that only someone with nothing left to prove can manage. Pryor wrote that he always thought Murphy's comedy was mean. He said he used to tell Murphy to soften up, to be a little nicer. That advice did not land well. Murphy bristled. He had been doing this his way for years, and it had made him the biggest star on the planet. So Pryor felt dismissed. Murphy felt rejected. 2 men on the same set every day, both convinced the other one wanted nothing to do with them. Neither said a word out loud. They just played their scenes and walked away carrying the same wound from opposite directions. They both thought the other one hated them. They were both wrong, and they never fixed it. Think about that the next time Sugar Ray and Quick share a scene. Fact 4. The original lead actress sued Murphy for $75 million. Before Jasmine Guy ever put on that dress, the role of Dominique LaRue belonged to someone else. Her name was Michael Michelle. She was 22 years old, hungry, ready to break through. She signed a contract for $27,500. She showed up to Paramount. She prepared. She was ready. Then day 2 of rehearsals arrived. According to Michelle, Murphy's behavior shifted almost immediately. He became cold and demanding. Then he asked her out. When she said no, she alleged that he attempted to fondle and caress her against her will. She refused. He stormed off. Within days, word reached her that Murphy had fired her. Murphy denied every element of her account. He stated they had never even had a private conversation. The lawsuit was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, but the real cost was Michelle's career. She was effectively unhireable while the legal battle played out and ended up working at the Gap to cover her bills. It took 2 full years before she landed her next significant role, New Jack City. Jasmine Guy stepped in and made the part legendary. But behind every iconic performance, there is sometimes a story that never made it to the credits. Fact 5. Dela Reese wasn't Murphy's first choice either. Dela Reese delivers arguably the most quotable scenes in the entire film. Her fist fight with Murphy is practically a cultural institution, and Murphy didn't want her. When building the cast, Reese was not on his shortlist for Vera. He had other names in mind. But then she walked into the audition and took over the room. She owned every line. She didn't read the part, she inhabited it. By the time she finished, the debate was over. Murphy cast her immediately.
With me, what the fuck is wrong with you? You done accused me of stealing. The only thing I'm stealing out here today is your face.
You out of your
And Reese turned Vera into something no actress on his original shortlist could have given him. Her chemistry with Red Foxx became so electric that it would eventually change what Murphy believed was possible on a television screen. Fact 6. Red Foxx was 67 years old and still untouchable. Red Foxx was born in 1922. By the time Harlem Nights went into production, he was 67 years old, not coasting, not slowing down, still delivering comedic sharpness that made audiences forget to breathe. Foxx was the original, before Pryor, before Murphy, before any of them. He was doing raw, unfiltered comedy on underground recordings before stand-up specials existed as a concept. He made it possible for every comedian who came after him to say the things that needed to be said out loud. And this was the last film he ever made. He died 2 years after Harlem Nights was released. That frame, those 3 men together, was the only time it ever happened, and it will never happen again. Fact 7. 50 years of black comedy history stood in one frame. Let's count it out because it deserves to be said clearly. Red Foxx, born 1922. Richard Pryor, born 1940. Eddie Murphy, born 1961. When the cameras rolled on Harlem Nights, there were 39 years between the oldest and youngest lead, and each man represented not just himself, but an entire movement. Foxx built the foundation, raw, uncompromising blue comedy that dared to speak truth when polished entertainment was all that was permitted. Pryor took that foundation and turned it into confessional art, deeply personal, devastating, laugh-so-you-don't-cry comedy that changed what the form could do. Murphy took what both of them built and became the biggest entertainment star on the planet. No film before or since has captured all 3 of these voices at the same time. Murphy understood the weight of what he was holding, and whatever the critics said afterward, the historical record is clear. He put 50 years of legacy on screen before time ran out. Fact 8. The funniest moments were never filmed. This one is going to hurt because there is nothing you can do about it. Between takes, when the cameras were off, Pryor and Foxx would just go. Old stories, new insults, decades of accumulated comedy spilling out in real time. Murphy has described it with genuine loss. He said they were all just crying, laughing. He said the funniest stuff happened when nobody was recording. 2 of the greatest comedians who ever lived, improvising for an audience of 1, riffing with the ease of men who had spent their whole lives doing exactly this. None of it was saved. Murphy later admitted what happened between takes could not compete with the finished film. It was better, sharper timing, looser instincts, real laughter, not performed laughter. But that is not how movies work. You get the script. You do not get the magic. Somewhere in the past, there are moments only the people in that room will ever know, and they are probably the funniest things ever said out loud in Los Angeles. Fact 9. Red Foxx and Dela Reese's arguments inspired a TV show. On set, Foxx and Reese were relentless. They bickered. They insulted each other between takes. They argued about nothing and made everyone around them helpless with laughter. Murphy could not stop watching. The rhythm, the timing, the way two veterans could turn a throwaway insult into a 4-act comedy in under 30 seconds. By the time filming wrapped, Murphy had made a decision. He was going to build a television show around exactly this. Just Foxx and Reese, playing a married couple, fighting their way through every episode. In 1991, the royal family premiered on CBS. The chemistry was everything Murphy remembered from the Harlem Nights set. Then, during a rehearsal, Red Foxx collapsed. Dela Reese thought he was doing a pratfall. He did them constantly to make the crew laugh. She laughed, the crew laughed, and then the laughter stopped because Foxx was not getting up. He was having a massive heart attack. He died later that day. He was 68 years old. Murphy paid for the entire funeral. The show tried to continue without its heart. It could not. The magic that started on the set of Harlem Nights died in a rehearsal hall 2 years later. Fact 10. Murphy wrote, directed, produced, and starred. Then, never directed again. In 1989, Eddie Murphy was the most powerful entertainer in Hollywood. Beverly Hills Cop, Coming to America, 48 Hours. The man could not miss. So when he decided to take complete creative control, writing, directing, producing, and starring, nobody at the studio was going to say no. The problem, as he later admitted, was that he threw it together too fast. He was juggling too many roles simultaneously and did not have time to prepare the way a first-time director needs to. When the film opened, the critics were not kind. Siskel and Ebert named it one of the worst films of 1989. The Razzies gave Murphy the award for Worst Screenplay. The man who had dominated Hollywood with back-to-back landmarks was being dragged through the press. Murphy processed it, accepted it, and made a decision. He told interviewers plainly, "I found out that I can't direct, and I won't do it anymore." He has kept that promise. In the decades since, he has starred in dozens of films, returned to stand-up, and earned every award Hollywood delayed giving him. But he has never once sat in the director's chair again. Harlem Nights is the only film Eddie Murphy ever wrote, directed, produced, and starred in. One attempt, one lesson, a promise he has never broken. Fact 11. Not a single frame was shot in Harlem. The title says Harlem. The story is set in 1938 Harlem. The characters bleed Harlem from every scene, and every single frame of this film was shot in Los Angeles. Not one scene was filmed in New York. Every street corner, every club interior, every back alley was either built as a set or found in LA and dressed to look like the other side of the country. The reason it works comes down to cinematographer Woody Omans, whose directive was deliberate and clear. Black skin tones would be the most essential color in every frame. That meant controlling the light, the palette, and the warmth with surgical precision. The result was a film that looked unlike anything else in 1989. Rich, deliberate, and visually seductive enough that audiences did not just want to watch it, they wanted to live in it. After Harlem Nights hit theaters, themed bars started opening across the country. People threw Harlem Nights parties. The aesthetic became a cultural movement. All of it built in Los Angeles. All of it pretending to be somewhere else. And somehow more Harlem than Harlem itself could have been. Fact 12. The story was based on real Harlem gangsters. Murphy did not invent Sugar Ray and Quick out of nothing. He pulled from real history, bloody history. In the 1930s, Harlem was a battleground. Dutch Schultz, a Jewish gangster with deep mob ties, wanted control of the numbers racket, the neighborhood's illegal lottery that generated enormous wealth. Standing in his way was Bumpy Johnson, a black gangster who refused to let outsiders run his streets. That dynamic is the exact spine of Harlem Nights. Bugsy Calhoun represents the white mob muscling into black enterprise. Sugar Ray and Quick represent the men who refuse to bend. Murphy was not writing fantasy. He was writing a story about economic sovereignty and what people are willing to do to protect what they built. Fact 13. Stephanie St. Clair has never been given enough credit. Of all the historical figures whose DNA runs through Harlem Nights, Stephanie St. Clair, known as Madam Queen, is the one who receives the least acknowledgement. She arrived in Harlem from the Caribbean and built one of the most sophisticated numbers operations in the city during the 1920s and 30s. When Dutch Schultz decided he wanted her territory, she refused him to his face and went to the press to say so publicly, writing letters to newspapers identifying him by name and calling out exactly what he was trying to do. In a time when a black woman operating outside the law had essentially no institutional protection, she held her ground against one of the most dangerous men in New York. The female characters in Harlem Nights, their dignity, their defiance, their refusal to be reduced, carry her echo whether Murphy intended it or not. Fact 14. 2 writers filed plagiarism lawsuits against Murphy. The legal trouble surrounding Harlem Nights extended well beyond the $75 million lawsuit. 2 separate writers came forward claiming Murphy had stolen their scripts. The allegations were serious enough that one judge found, in formal court language, substantially similar plots, characters, scenes, settings, feel, and detail between the plaintiff's work and Murphy's film. Both cases settled out of court. Both settlements were sealed. The pattern was hard to ignore, particularly because just 1 year earlier, columnist Art Buchwald had sued Paramount over Coming to America and won, awarded $825,000. Writers were watching Murphy closely, and when Harlem Nights arrived, 2 of them felt they recognized their own work on screen. Fact 15. Red Foxx was also sued during the production. The legal chaos surrounding this film extended to its supporting cast. Red Fox's own talent agency sued him during the Harlem Nights period for unpaid commissions totaling more than $50,000. Despite decades of legendary work, Foxx was not a wealthy man at this point. He had spent money as fast as he made it throughout his career and carried ongoing financial troubles that were rarely discussed alongside his celebrated public image.
Well, Red Foxx went through some life and money issues, but he always paved the way for other successful comedians, and he used his show to promote black performers.
The set of Harlem Nights was not just a film production. It was a legal battlefield operating simultaneously on multiple fronts, and the camera captured none of it. Fact 16. Harlem Nights beat The Little Mermaid at the box office. November 17, 1989. Harlem Nights opened in theaters and immediately went to number 1. The opening weekend gross was $16.1 million, above Look Who's Talking, above every other wide release that weekend, and directly above a small Disney animated film that was quietly beginning a journey toward becoming one of the most beloved movies of all time. The Little Mermaid finished behind Murphy's passion project. Harlem Nights also broke a record that weekend, the highest opening gross during the pre-Christmas holiday period. Murphy had done it again, or so it seemed. The following week, Back to the Future Part 2 knocked them to number 2. Critical momentum slowed. By the end of the theatrical run, Harlem Nights had earned $60.9 million domestically. For most films, a triumph. For a $30 million production starring the most bankable comedian in the world, it landed closer to a disappointment. Murphy expected a classic. He got a cult film instead. As it turned out, the cult was more loyal than the critics. Fact 17. The Razzie for Worst Screenplay was a public humiliation. The Razzies exist to embarrass people. That is their purpose. And Murphy won one, Worst Screenplay, for the script he had written himself, the story he had researched, shaped, produced, and directed. The same year he broke a box office record, the Razzies handed him a trophy for failure. It was public, deliberate, and it landed hard. Murphy has spoken about Harlem Nights honestly in the years since. He acknowledges going in too fast, being spread too thin, lacking the directorial preparation the project required. But acknowledging your own mistakes does not make someone else mocking them any less sharp. Fact 18. Murphy had more photos of Pryor than Elvis on his walls. This one is more intimate than scandalous, but it says everything about who Murphy is and where he came from.
Eddie Murphy, he's sharing his career regrets. Also, the late Chadwick Boseman, he's going to be honored in Hollywood this week. Gwen Baumgartner.
He grew up studying Richard Pryor the way some people study religion. Every album, every special, every recorded set, Pryor was the measuring stick. By the time Murphy was rising through his career, his walls were covered in photographs of the man, more photos of Pryor than of Elvis Presley, which Murphy specifically mentioned in interviews as the detail that truly communicated the depth of the devotion. And then he finally got to work with him. And the man he had worshipped from a distance kept his distance up close. The idol and the fans spent weeks on the same set and never became what Murphy had dreamed they would be. That is not a Hollywood story. That is a human story, and it happens to all of us. Fact 19. Michael Michel's case landed before the language existed. The lawsuit filed by Michael Michel against Murphy arrived in a specific cultural moment, the formal vocabulary that would later define the conversation around workplace harassment in Hollywood.
You know, because I had worked for a very long time before I became a mom, and you have to live somewhat like a gypsy if you're an actor.
The frameworks, the accountability structures, the institutional awareness, none of it existed the way it does today. Michelle filed her claim, went public with her allegations, and watched the machinery of the entertainment industry respond the way it almost always responded in that era, with denial, silence, and a settlement that sealed the details away from public record. What she experienced, the vulnerability of a young actress in a room with a major star, the consequences of saying no, the career interruption that followed, became familiar themes in conversations Hollywood would eventually be forced to have decades later. Her case was early, and early cases rarely receive the retrospective acknowledgement they deserve. Fact 20. Jasmine Guy made the role iconic, despite the shadow behind it. Jasmine Guy stepped into Dominique Leroux knowing, at least to some degree, that the role had been contested. The lawsuit, the removal of the previous actress, the shadow hanging over the production, none of it was invisible. She came in anyway. She prepared, she performed, and she delivered one of the most memorable supporting turns in a film stacked with legends. Her elegance, her timing, the specific way she navigated scenes as a woman who understood exactly the world she was operating in. It was precise, intelligent work. In a film built around comedy royalty, Jasmine Guy held her own without flinching. That deserves to be said clearly and without qualification. Fact 21. The Bumpy Johnson. Parallel runs deeper than most realize. The character of Sugar Ray draws directly from the real-life figure of Bumpy Johnson, one of the most complex and significant figures in Harlem's history. Johnson was a gangster by definition and a community figure in practice. He fed people during the Depression, protected neighborhood residents from outside exploitation, and commanded loyalty that made him a hero to some, even as law enforcement hunted him. His confrontation with Dutch Schultz, a real historical battle over who would control Harlem's economy in the 1930s, is the direct template for what Murphy built in this film. The conflict was never just about criminal enterprise. It was about whether a black community would be allowed to control its own economy or whether that economy would be seized by outside forces backed by greater violence. Murphy put that history on screen, dressed it in silk and jazz, and called it entertainment. The bones of it are real. Fact 22. The numbers racket was a real economic system. The illegal lottery at the center of Harlem Nights is not a movie invention. It was one of the largest underground economies in American urban history. In communities where formal banking was inaccessible or actively hostile to black residents, the numbers game functioned as an alternative financial ecosystem. People bet small amounts on 3-digit numbers. Winners could collect at 600 to 1 odds. The operators became the wealthiest figures in their neighborhoods and funded businesses, supported families, and created economic infrastructure that the formal economy refused to provide. By the 1930s, the numbers racket in Harlem was generating millions annually, which is exactly why organized crime wanted it. Murphy was not writing fantasy. He was writing about what people do to protect what they built when outsiders come to take it. Fact 23. The aesthetic inspired a cultural movement after release. After the film hit theaters, something unexpected happened. The costumes, the zoot suits, the fedoras, the evening gowns dripping with 1930s elegance, and the warm golden visual palette that Woody Omans constructed started showing up in the real world. Harlem Nights-themed bars opened.
Tonight, we take you behind the scenes at one of the city's popular Harlem breweries. It is one of the city's only black-owned such craft beer bars.
Private parties were styled around the film's look. People recreated the aesthetic in ways that had nothing to do with box office performance. This is what happens when a film's world is built right, when the design team, the costume department, and the cinematographer collectively create something so internally coherent that audiences do not just want to watch it, they want to live inside it. The controlled construction of a fake New York, built entirely in Los Angeles, meant every frame was exactly what it needed to be. And what it needed to be was beautiful. Fact 24. 3 generations of black comedy were never in the same frame again. After Harlem Nights, nothing like it was ever assembled again. Foxx died in 1991.
All righty, Bruce, thank you. One of America's favorite comedians has died. Redd Foxx collapsed last night during a rehearsal of his new comedy series.
Pryor's illness progressed. Murphy moved forward. The specific alignment of those 3 men, each representing a distinct era, each building on the legacy of the one before, was a window that opened once and closed forever. Murphy was 28 years old when he directed this film, overextended, underprepared, aching to be mentored by a man who was too sick and too guarded to give him what he needed. He had legendary figures on his set and could not always access what they carried. The gap between what this film could have been and what it became is real, and yet what exists is still remarkable. Those 3 men together, in silk and fedoras, in a world built from scratch, it happened. It is preserved. You can watch it today. Fact 25. The film's theatrical failure did not predict its cultural legacy. In 1989, the critics attacked it. The Razzies mocked it. The box office disappointed relative to expectations. And then something else happened. Slowly, quietly, over years, people kept watching it. People kept quoting it. Lines from Harlem Nights entered the vocabulary of Black American comedy in a way no critical consensus could prevent. Dela Reese's scenes became legendary reference points. The aesthetic became a touchstone. The film became something people returned to, introduced to their families, argued about, and defended with genuine passion. By the time 35 years had passed, Harlem Nights had done something its initial reviews would never have predicted. It had become a classic, not because the critics reversed course, because the audience never let it go. Fact 26. Redd Foxx's final scene hits differently when you know what comes next. Go back and watch Redd Foxx's last scene in Harlem Nights. Watch it knowing that this was the last film he ever made. Watch it knowing that 2 years later he would collapse in a rehearsal hall and Dela Reese would think it was one of his pratfalls, because he did them all the time to make the crew laugh, and it would not be a pratfall. Watch him knowing that Murphy paid for his funeral, that the television show Murphy built specifically to keep that chemistry alive would die with its star mid-rehearsal.
We've all got him, but Eddie Murphy, he's sharing his career regrets. Also, the late Chadwick Boseman, he's going to be honored.
That the comedy that spilled out between takes, the funniest moments never recorded, would never happen again.
Just theoretically, that pussy's on lease. You're leasing the pussy.
Redd Foxx, at 67, in silk and a fedora, playing a man who had built something worth protecting and fighting for. It reads differently now, doesn't it? Fact 27. The silence between Pryor and Murphy was never resolved. Murphy thought Pryor didn't like him. Pryor thought Murphy didn't like him. Both beliefs were formed on the same set, during the same weeks, in the same rooms. Neither man said a word to the other about it. They just carried the silence. Murphy talked about it in his 1990 interview with Spike Lee. Pryor wrote about it in his 1997 autobiography. 2 public confessions of a private wound, delivered separately, years apart, never to each other. They stood in the same frame, made something that has lasted 35 years, and never actually connected. The movie that was supposed to unite 2 legends became the movie that proved they were always reaching across a distance neither one could close. That might be the saddest fact in this entire list. Fact 28. This was the only time it ever happened, and it will never happen again. Here is the final fact, the most important one. There has never been another film that put Redd Foxx, Richard Pryor, and Eddie Murphy in the same frame. 3 generations of black comedy royalty, each one building on the foundation the previous one laid, each one changing what was possible for the one who came after. 50 years of history, 50 years of pushing American comedy into territory it had never gone before. It happened once, in 1989, in a film that critics called one of the worst of the year. On a set surrounded by lawsuits, secret illness, mutual misunderstanding, bruised egos, and buried tension that never got resolved. And somehow, through all of it, they made something that people are still quoting 35 years later, something that inspired a television show, something that sparked an aesthetic movement, something rooted in real history, real resistance, and real legacy. Murphy was 28 years old. He threw it together too fast, and he knows it, and he has always said so. And he still made something that lasted. That is the final fact, that despite everything, despite the lawsuits and the rejection and the illness and the distance and the critical failure and the unresolved silence between two men who each thought the other hated him, Harlem Nights survived. It survived because the culture held it, because audiences decided it mattered, because those three men in the same frame, whatever pain surrounded them, represented something that had never existed before and will never exist again. 28 facts. Which one hit you the hardest? Was it Pryor quietly fighting a disease while everyone around him thought he was just being calm? Was it Murphy and Pryor both believing the other one hated them, carrying that wound for years when the truth was they were both just afraid? Was it Red Fox at 67, unknowingly filming his last scene? Was it the actress who said no and paid for it with 2 years of her career? Drop it in the comments. Tell us which fact you are going to be thinking about the next time you press play on this film, because you are watching it differently now, and if you have never seen it, what are you waiting for? If this gave you something you did not have before, hit like and subscribe. We go this deep on every classic, every cast, every story they did not put in the press kit. Behind every great film is a story the finished product could never fully hold. Now you know more of this one.